paralyzed and ignored at her best friend's wedding, until the powerful billionaire asked to dance with her. Every conversation in the garden wedding stopped dead. Jason Johnson, the billionaire everyone was desperate to impress, was walking straight toward table 12. Toward the woman they'd all deliberately ignored. Tanisha's heart hammered as 300 pairs of eyes tracked his movement across the pristine lawn. He stopped beside her wheelchair, extended his hand, and said the 5 words that would either destroy her completely or change everything forever. "Would you like to dance?" The gasps were audible. Phones started recording. But what happened next would trigger a media firestorm that threatened to cost them both everything they'd worked for. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The Garden of Forgotten Dreams. The Hartford Estates gardens bloomed in pristine perfection, white roses cascading like silk ribbons against emerald hedges that had been manicured by hands that knew the difference between wealth and mere money. Tanisha Briggs adjusted the flowing fabric of her beige dress, a soft, elegant piece she'd found at a consignment shop, and tailored herself to accommodate her wheelchair. The September afternoon sun filtered through ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows across the white carpet that led to an altar draped in ivory silk and baby's breath. She sat at a small round table positioned strategically behind a towering arrangement of white hydrangeas and roses, close enough to witness the ceremony but far enough to remain conveniently forgotten. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd helped Madison plan every detail of this outdoor celebration, had calculated the logistics of seating arrangements and suggested the exact placement of each floral display during countless late-night planning sessions. Yet here she was, relegated to what felt like the children's table of wedding seating. The autumn air carried the scent of roses and the distant sound of a string quartet, mixing with laughter that seemed to deliberately exclude her from its warmth. Around her, Madison's new social circle, colleagues from her marketing firm, neighbors from her upscale neighborhood, friends who measured worth in zip codes and stock portfolios, mingled with the easy confidence of people who'd never questioned their place in the world. Tanisha's fingers traced the delicate beadwork on her dress's neckline, watching Madison, radiant in flowing ivory silk, pose for photographs with her new husband Robert beneath an archway of white roses. They'd been inseparable since freshman year at Georgetown, had dreamed together about careers and weddings and futures filled with possibility. Madison had visited her every day during those first dark weeks in the hospital, had held her hand while doctors explained terms like complete spinal cord injury and permanent paralysis. So when had everything changed? "Oh, you're still here." Chloe Richmond's voice cut through the garden's tranquility like a blade wrapped in silk. Madison's maid of honor approached with the graceful stride of someone who'd never doubted her right to take up space, her champagne-colored dress perfectly complementing her platinum blonde hair. "Madison wasn't sure you'd stay for the reception portion." Tanisha's journalism degree and summa cum laude honors suddenly felt like credentials that carried no weight in this manicured world. "Why wouldn't I stay? I'm part of the wedding party." "Well, technically you're more of an honorary attendee." Chloe's smile was sharp enough to cut through the garden's peaceful atmosphere. "Which is so thoughtful of Madison, really. She always did have a soft spot for charity cases from college." The words landed like stones thrown into still water, sending ripples of hurt through Tanisha's carefully maintained composure. Her accident 3 years ago, a drunk driver who'd run a red light while she was crossing campus after a late study session, had taught her that vulnerability was often mistaken for weakness, and weakness invited predators like Chloe Richmond. "I'll be sure to mention to Madison how graciously you're representing her values," Tanisha replied, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her chest. Chloe's laugh was as bright and cold as winter sunlight. "Values. Right. Well, enjoy the view from back here. The photographer is doing group shots after the cake cutting, but don't worry, I'm sure they'll get plenty of beautiful pictures without any complications." Complications. As if 3 years of physical therapy, learning to navigate a world built for people who walked, and maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working 2 jobs to pay for graduate school had made her something problematic rather than resilient. After Chloe drifted away toward the main cluster of guests, Tanisha found herself studying the social dynamics playing out across the estate's pristine lawns. These people, Madison's new crowd from her prestigious marketing firm, moved through conversations about vacation homes and investment portfolios with the fluid ease of those who'd never questioned their access to such things. She listened to fragments of dialogue that revealed a world where her monthly student loan payment might cover someone's weekend spa retreat, where her part-time salary at the university tutoring center wouldn't fund a single dinner at the restaurants they mentioned casually. The garden buzzed with talk of upcoming charity galas and board positions that seemed more about social climbing than genuine service. Tanisha recognized the type from her research on social stratification: people who gave generously to disability organizations while simultaneously ensuring their own spaces remained conveniently inaccessible to the very people they claimed to support. Had Madison always belonged to this world, or had success slowly reshaped her into someone who could orchestrate such deliberate exclusion? She thought about their college days, sharing ramen noodles and late-night study sessions in Madison's cramped dorm room. When Madison had been the first person at her bedside after the accident, promising that nothing would change between them, that friendship transcended circumstance. When they'd planned futures that included each other, had sworn that success would never come between them. But something had shifted. Subtly at first, postponed coffee dates, returned calls that came hours later, invitations that arrived with less enthusiasm. Then came the engagement party where Tanisha had been the only person excluded from group photographs. The bridal shower where she'd found herself seated alone, close enough to observe but too distant to truly participate. Have you ever felt invisible at a celebration you helped plan? What would you do if someone you trusted began treating you like an inconvenience rather than a friend? Share your thoughts below. Near the main gathering, beneath the shade of an ancient maple tree, stood a man who commanded attention without seeming to seek it. Jason Johnson, JJ, as the business pages called him, owner of Johnson Enterprises and one of the most influential figures in corporate America. She recognized him from newspaper photographs, but they hadn't captured the quiet intensity of his presence, the way he seemed to observe everything while participating minimally in the social theater surrounding him. He was taller than his media images suggested, with dark hair showing distinguished silver at the temples and eyes that seemed to catalog details others missed. His perfectly tailored brown overcoat hung with casual elegance over what was undoubtedly an expensive suit, but he wore the ensemble with the understated confidence of someone accustomed to quality rather than someone trying to prove their worth. What struck Tanisha most was his positioning, close enough to the main group to be socially appropriate, but maintaining enough distance to suggest he was more observer than participant. She'd noted the same detached interest in her own research, the perspective of someone studying social patterns rather than being consumed by them. Their eyes met across the garden's carefully orchestrated beauty, and for a moment that felt suspended between heartbeats, she saw something unexpected in his expression. Not pity, not the uncomfortable avoidance she'd grown accustomed to, not the carefully practiced blindness that allowed people to look through her entirely. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if he saw her not as Table 12's forgotten occupant but as an individual worth noticing. A uniformed security officer stood discreetly nearby, clearly JJ's protection, maintaining professional distance while keeping watchful eyes on the crowd. The man's presence spoke to the level of influence and potential risk that came with JJ's position, yet somehow didn't feel intrusive in the garden's peaceful atmosphere. Then Madison's father stepped forward to address the gathered guests, and the moment dissolved into the rustle of fabric and the shuffle of feet as attention turned toward the impromptu speech beginning near the rose-covered altar. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Hartford's voice carried the authority of old money and older traditions across the garden's manicured expanse. Before we move to the reception area, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us in celebrating Madison and Robert's union. This gathering represents not just the joining of two hearts, but the coming together of families who share values of excellence, tradition, and mutual respect. Tanisha listened to words that felt designed to exclude as much as they included. Two families. As if years of friendship, loyalty, and shared history counted for nothing compared to bloodlines and bank balances. We're particularly honored to have some very distinguished guests with us this afternoon, Charles continued, his gaze sweeping across the garden with practiced precision. Including Jason Johnson of Johnson Enterprises, whose philanthropic work has made such a difference in our community. Polite applause rippled through the outdoor gathering, and Tanisha watched JJ acknowledge the recognition with a slight nod, his expression remaining carefully neutral. She'd read about his charitable initiatives, funding for medical research, scholarships for underprivileged students, accessibility programs that suggested someone who understood barriers came in many forms. And now, Charles raised his champagne glass toward the golden afternoon light. Let's toast to Madison and Robert, and to the beautiful future they're building together. Crystal chimed softly as guests raised their glasses beneath the canopy of roses and oak leaves, and Tanisha found herself lifting her own champagne in a toast to the friend who'd once promised that nothing would change between them. The irony tasted bitter on her tongue, celebrating a union while feeling more isolated than she had since those first devastating days learning to navigate life from a wheelchair. As the toasts concluded and conversations resumed across the garden's various clusters, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Jason Johnson was walking toward her table, his stride purposeful but unhurried across the estate's perfect grass, as if he'd made a decision and was implementing it with the same precision that had built his business empire. Several guests turned to track his progress, their expressions shifting from curious to confused as they realized his destination. Chloe Richmond actually paused mid-conversation with a group of Madison's sorority sisters, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips as she watched the evening's most important guest approach table 12. JJ stopped beside her small table, his presence commanding attention from everyone within 30 feet of the rose arrangement. His security officer maintained discreet distance, professional but unobtrusive. Up close, Tanisha could see the fine lines around JJ's eyes that spoke of someone who spent considerable time outdoors, the calluses on his hands that suggested he was more than just a man who signed checks from behind a mahogany desk. "Ms. Briggs," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold formality she'd encountered throughout the afternoon. "I'm Jason Johnson. I believe we have a mutual connection at Georgetown. Dr. Patricia Williams in the mathematics department speaks very highly of your accessibility research." The mention of her mentor, the professor who'd encouraged her to pursue graduate studies despite her accident, who'd written recommendation letters that opened doors, caught her completely off guard. "You know Dr. Williams. She serves on the board of the Johnson Foundation. She's mentioned your work on accessibility algorithms quite frequently, actually." His smile reached his eyes in a way that suggested genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "I was hoping I might have the opportunity to discuss your research with you." Around them, conversations had stilled as people strained to understand this unexpected interaction. Tanisha felt the weight of dozens of gazes, the barely concealed shock of guests who couldn't comprehend why the afternoon's most influential attendee was choosing to focus his attention on the woman they'd systematically ignored. "I'd like that very much," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Though I'm surprised Dr. Williams mentioned me. I'm just a graduate student working on theoretical applications." "Just?" JJ's eyebrows rose slightly, and she caught a glimpse of steel beneath his genteel exterior. "From what I understand, you've developed algorithms that could revolutionize how public spaces are designed for accessibility. That doesn't sound like just anything to me." The fact that he knew about her research, really knew, not just surface details someone might have mentioned in passing, sent a shock of recognition through her. This was a man who paid attention to substance, who saw value in work that others might dismiss as academic or niche. The afternoon breeze stirred the roses above them, sending petals drifting like confetti across the garden's perfect tableau, as if nature itself was celebrating this unexpected moment of recognition. The dance that changed everything. "Would you mind if I joined you?" JJ asked, already beginning to pull out the ornate iron chair across from her small table. The gesture was simple yet revolutionary, a man of his stature choosing to sit in the garden's forgotten corner, to engage with someone who'd been systematically excluded from the afternoon's festivities. As he settled into the chair, Tanisha caught sight of Madison across the garden, her friend's expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been embarrassment. The bride's carefully orchestrated afternoon was veering off script, and Madison Hartford-Wells had never been comfortable with improvisation. "Now then," JJ said, his attention focused entirely on her despite the crowd of influential people who were undoubtedly hoping for a moment of his time. "Tell me about these accessibility algorithms. Dr. Williams mentioned they could transform how we think about universal design." For the next 20 minutes, Tanisha found herself in the kind of intellectual conversation she'd been craving for months. JJ didn't just listen politely, he asked pointed questions that revealed a genuine understanding of both the technical challenges and the broader social implications of her work. He understood that accessibility wasn't charity, it was good design that benefited everyone. "The beauty of your approach," he said, leaning forward with genuine engagement, "is that you're not retrofitting solutions. You're reimagining the foundation itself." Exactly. Tanisha's eyes lit up with the passion that had driven her through countless late nights of coding and research. When you design for the margins, you create better solutions for everyone. Curb cuts help wheelchair users, but they also help people with strollers, delivery workers, travelers with luggage. Universal design principles. JJ nodded. "I've been trying to convince my architectural team to think this way for years. Perhaps you'd be interested in consulting on some projects." The offer hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities that extended far beyond professional opportunity. This was recognition, validation, a chance to turn theoretical research into real-world impact. Their conversation was interrupted by the gentle strains of a string quartet beginning the first dance. Across the garden, Madison and Robert moved onto the temporary dance floor that had been installed on the estate's main lawn, their movements perfectly choreographed for the photographer who circled them like a satellite. "Ah," JJ said, glancing toward the dancing couple. "The ceremonial portion begins." Other couples began joining the newlyweds. Madison's parents, Robert's family. The wedding party paired off in combinations that had clearly been planned and rehearsed. Tanisha watched from her isolated table as Chloe Richmond swept onto the dance floor in the arms of Robert's best man, her champagne dress catching the afternoon light like liquid gold. The music swelled, and she felt the familiar ache of watching life happen around her rather than to her. Dancing had been one of her greatest joys before the accident. She'd been on Georgetown's dance team, had spent weekends at clubs where she could lose herself in rhythm and movement. Now she watched others experience that freedom while she remained anchored to her chair. "Would you like to dance?" The words were spoken so quietly she almost missed them over the music. Tanisha turned to find JJ watching her with an expression of gentle invitation, his hand extended toward her. "I'm sorry," she managed, certain she'd misheard. "Would you like to dance?" he repeated, his voice carrying across the small space between them with perfect clarity. "With me." The garden seemed to hold its breath. Conversations faltered as people processed what they were witnessing. Jason Johnson, one of the most powerful men in America, asking a woman in a wheelchair to dance. The string quartet continued playing, but the social symphony around them had stumbled into discord. I can't exactly." Tanisha gestured toward her wheelchair, her voice catching on words that felt too heavy to speak. "I wasn't asking your wheelchair to dance," JJ said gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was asking you." He stood and moved around the table with fluid grace, positioning himself beside her chair. His security officer, she noticed, had shifted slightly to maintain visual contact while giving them space for what was clearly an unprecedented moment. "May I?" JJ asked, indicating her chair's handles. Tanisha's heart hammered against her ribs as she nodded, watching this powerful man, this stranger who'd seen her worth when her oldest friend had chosen to forget it, position himself behind her wheelchair. His hands settled on the handles with careful respect, waiting for her permission to proceed. "I'd be honored," she whispered. Together, they moved on to the edge of the dance floor. The other couples created space around them, whether from courtesy or shock was unclear. The photographer, who'd been capturing Madison and Robert's perfect moments, hesitated as he processed this unexpected development. JJ guided her chair in gentle circles, his movements creating a rhythm that matched the music's tempo. But what transformed the moment from gesture to magic was how he danced, leaning forward occasionally to speak quietly in her ear, his hand sometimes resting gently on her shoulder, moving with her rather than simply pushing her wheelchair around the floor. "Close your eyes," he murmured, his voice warm against her ear. "What?" "Close your eyes and feel the music." Tanisha let her eyelids drift shut, and suddenly the awkwardness of the wheelchair melted away. She felt the breeze stirring her hair, the sun warming her shoulders, the gentle rhythm of their movement creating its own dance. JJ's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as he guided her chair in an elegant waltz that defied every assumption about what dancing could look like. When the song reached its crescendo, he spun her chair in a graceful circle that sent her beige dress flowing around her like water. For those brief moments, suspended in movement and music and the warmth of unexpected connection, she felt beautiful. Not despite her wheelchair, but in the wholeness of who she was. What does it mean to feel beautiful exactly as you are? Have you ever experienced a moment when someone saw past your limitations to celebrate your possibilities? Share your thoughts below. The music ended, and the spell began to fracture as reality reasserted itself. Applause rippled across the garden. Polite, confused, but genuine. JJ positioned her chair near the edge of the dance floor and moved to face her, taking her hands in both of his. "Thank you," he said simply. "That was the most beautiful dance I've had in years." "Thank you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion she hadn't expected. "I haven't felt like that since." "Since when?" "Since before. When dancing was something I did instead of something I watched." His thumbs brushed across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her breath catch. "Maybe the problem isn't that you can't dance. Maybe the problem is that no one's being creative enough to dance with you." The words hit her like a revelation. For 3 years, she'd accepted other people's definitions of what was possible for her life. She'd internalized the limitations others placed on her experience, had shrunk herself to fit into the narrow space that society allocated for people in wheelchairs. But JJ had just proven that limitations were often failures of imagination rather than immutable realities. "Jason." The voice belonged to Madison, who approached with the careful smile she used when trying to manage uncomfortable situations. "How lovely to see you. I hope Tanisha isn't boring you with all her academic theories." The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable. Tanisha's work reduced to academic theories, her conversation framed as potentially boring to someone of JJ's stature. The words carried the sting of a friendship that had curdled into condescension. "On the contrary," JJ replied, his voice carrying an edge that suggested he'd caught the insult embedded in Madison's pleasantries. "Ms. Briggs has been sharing some fascinating insights about accessibility design. I'm hoping to convince her to consult on some of my company's projects." Madison's smile faltered slightly. "Oh. Well, that's wonderful. Tanisha always was brilliant with numbers." Numbers. As if her research on human dignity and equal access could be reduced to mathematical equations, as if her work to create a more inclusive world was merely technical expertise rather than passionate advocacy. "Actually," JJ continued, "I was hoping to steal her away for the rest of the afternoon. I'd love to show her some of the accessibility features we've implemented at my estate, and I think she'd have valuable input on our upcoming community center project." The invitation was clearly genuine, but it was also a rescue, a way to remove Tanisha from a social situation that had become increasingly toxic. Madison's expression suggested she understood the subtext perfectly. "That's very kind of you," Madison said, her voice tight with the effort of maintaining social graces. "Though I'm sure Tanisha would prefer to stay for the cake cutting. She helped plan so many details of today." "Did she?" JJ's eyebrows rose with interest that felt deliberately pointed. How thoughtful of her. And how wonderful that her contributions are being properly acknowledged. The words carried layers of meaning that made Madison flush slightly. Here was a man who'd noticed Tanisha's relegation to table 12, who'd seen through the careful social choreography designed to exclude while maintaining plausible deniability. Tanisha, JJ turned to her, his voice gentle but leaving the choice entirely in her hands. What would you prefer? The question was simple, but it represented something revolutionary: agency. For the first time all day, someone was asking what she wanted rather than telling her what she should accept. She looked at Madison, at the friend who'd once held her hand in the hospital while she learned to navigate a completely altered reality. The friend who'd promised that nothing would change between them, who'd sworn that friendship transcended circumstance. But promises, Tanisha realized, required intention to fulfill them, and Madison had clearly decided that Tanisha no longer fit the life she was building. I'd love to see your estate, Tanisha said to JJ, her voice steady despite the monumental nature of the choice she was making. And I'd be honored to discuss the community center project. JJ's smile was warm and genuine. Excellent. Marcus, he called to his security officer, would you mind bringing the car around? Of course, sir, the uniformed man replied, speaking into a discreet microphone before moving toward the estate's main drive. As preparations were made for their departure, Tanisha felt the weight of the entire garden's attention. Conversations had shifted to whispered speculations about what they'd just witnessed. Chloe Richmond stood frozen near the cake table, her mouth slightly open in an expression of shock that would have been comical under different circumstances. I should say goodbye to Madison, Tanisha said, though the prospect felt like walking through broken glass. Of course, JJ agreed. Take all the time you need. Tanisha navigated her wheelchair toward where Madison stood with Robert and his parents, the happy couple's conversation dying as she approached. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden, and she realized how much time had passed since JJ first sat at her table. Madison, she said quietly, I wanted to thank you for including me today. The words were carefully chosen, neutral enough to maintain dignity while acknowledging the reality of what inclusion had actually looked like. You're leaving. Madison's voice carried a note of something: relief, concern, guilt. That was difficult to parse. Mr. Johnson has some business opportunities he'd like to discuss, Tanisha replied. It seems my research might have practical applications I hadn't considered. That's wonderful, Madison said, though her smile looked strained. You deserve all the success in the world. Deserve. As if success were a compensation prize for enduring Madison's version of friendship, rather than something Tanisha had earned through talent and hard work. I hope you and Robert will be very happy together, Tanisha said sincerely. Despite everything, she genuinely wanted Madison to find joy. You looked beautiful up there. Thank you. Madison's voice was softer now, and for a moment, Tanisha glimpsed the girl she'd shared dreams with in their Georgetown dorm room. Tanisha, Yes. I hope you know that I. Madison struggled with words that seemed to catch in her throat. I never meant for you to feel. I know, Tanisha said gently, though she wasn't entirely certain what Madison had intended versus what she'd allowed to happen. Take care of yourself, Madison. The goodbye felt final in a way that transcended the afternoon's events. They were two women who'd grown in different directions, whose lives no longer intersected in meaningful ways. It was sad but not tragic. Sometimes people simply outgrew each other. As Tanisha returned to where JJ waited near her forgotten table, she felt an unexpected lightness. The weight of trying to maintain a friendship that had become one-sided, of accepting crumbs of inclusion while pretending they constituted a feast, had been lifted from her shoulders. Ready? JJ asked. More than ready, she replied. His security officer, Marcus, appeared with news that the car was prepared. JJ walked alongside Tanisha's wheelchair as they made their way through the garden toward the estate's main drive, past clusters of guests who watched their departure with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disapproval. At the car, a sleek black sedan that somehow managed to be impressive without being ostentatious, Marcus held the door while JJ ensured Tanisha was comfortably settled before folding her wheelchair and placing it in the trunk with practiced efficiency. Marcus has some experience with accessibility accommodations, JJ explained as he settled into the seat beside her. We've made it a priority to ensure our vehicles can accommodate various needs. That's thoughtful, Tanisha said, impressed by the level of consideration that had clearly gone into planning that extended far beyond today's spontaneous invitation. As the car pulled away from the Hartford estate, Tanisha watched the garden celebration recede through the rear window. The white roses continued blooming in perfect rows, the string quartet played for couples who moved in practiced harmony, and life proceeded exactly as it had been orchestrated to proceed. But something fundamental had shifted in those hours among the roses and rejection. She'd been reminded that her worth wasn't determined by other people's capacity to recognize it, that dignity was something she possessed rather than something others could grant or withhold. Any regrets? JJ asked quietly as the estate disappeared behind them. Tanisha considered the question seriously. She was leaving behind the last remnants of a friendship that had shaped her college years, abandoning a social circle that had never truly welcomed her, stepping away from the familiar pain of being included on sufferance. None, she said, and meant it completely. The afternoon sun slanted through the car's windows as they drove toward whatever came next, and for the first time in years, Tanisha felt like she was moving toward possibility rather than away from disappointment. The dance in the garden had lasted only minutes, but it had changed everything. The space between worlds. The Johnson estate materialized from behind iron gates that whispered open at their approach, revealing 12 acres of landscape perfection that made the Hartford property look modest by comparison. But as their car wound up the curved drive, Tanisha noticed something remarkable. The grounds had been designed with accessibility as a priority, not an afterthought. Wide, gently sloping paths connected different areas of the garden. Raised planters brought flower beds to eye level for someone seated. Even the outdoor lighting had been positioned to eliminate shadows that might obscure obstacles for people with visual impairments. You weren't kidding about the accessibility features, Tanisha murmured, studying the thoughtful integration of universal design principles. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have noticed half of these details, JJ admitted as Marcus parked near a modern architectural masterpiece that somehow managed to complement rather than overwhelm the natural landscape. My perspective changed after I met Dr. Williams and began funding accessibility research. It's amazing how much of the world becomes invisible when you're not forced to think about it. The house itself defied every stereotype of billionaire excess. Clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows created a sense of openness that invited rather than intimidated. The entrance featured a gentle ramp integrated so seamlessly into the design that it enhanced rather than compromised the aesthetic. "Let me show you around," JJ said as Marcus retrieved her wheelchair. "I'd particularly love your thoughts on the community spaces we're planning." For the next hour, Tanisha experienced what it felt like to move through spaces designed for dignity. Doorways were wide enough for comfortable passage. Bathrooms featured accessible fixtures that didn't scream special accommodation. The kitchen's island could be approached from multiple heights, making it functional for both seated and standing users. "This isn't retrofitted accessibility," she observed as they toured his home office, where adjustable desks and multiple seating options created an environment where anyone could work comfortably. This was designed from the ground up with inclusion in mind. Dr. Williams introduced me to a consultant who'd survived a spinal cord injury, JJ explained, settling into a chair across from where she'd positioned herself near the window overlooking the gardens. "She spent 2 days here, pointing out assumptions I didn't even know I was making. It was humbling. Most people aren't willing to have their assumptions challenged. Most people aren't forced to confront how their design choices exclude others." His expression grew thoughtful. "Until that consultation, I thought accessibility meant adding ramps and wider bathrooms. I didn't understand that it's about reimagining what inclusion looks like from the foundation up. They moved to the main living area, where a wall of windows framed the estate's gardens like a living painting. JJ poured 2 glasses of sparkling water from a bar area that included both standing and seated service heights, another detail that spoke to intentional rather than obligatory accommodation. "So," he said, settling onto a sofa positioned to face her wheelchair comfortably, "tell me about your research. What got you interested in accessibility algorithms?" Tanisha found herself sharing the story she rarely told, how her accident had opened her eyes to the countless ways society was designed to exclude people like her. How she'd realized that the problem wasn't her disability, but rather environments and systems that failed to account for human diversity. "I spent weeks after my accident unable to access buildings I'd walked into hundreds of times before," she explained. "The library where I worked had a ramp, but it was around back, past the dumpsters. Like accessing knowledge was a privilege I no longer deserved conveniently." That must have been incredibly isolating. It was. But it also made me angry, and anger can be fuel if you channel it correctly. She paused, studying his expression for signs of the pity or discomfort she'd grown accustomed to seeing when she discussed her accident. Instead, she found genuine interest and what looked like recognition. "What about you? What drives your interest in accessibility beyond the research funding?" Something shifted in JJ's expression, a vulnerability flickering across features that usually maintained careful control. "My younger sister was born with cerebral palsy. Growing up, I watched her navigate a world that constantly reminded her she didn't belong." The revelation hung between them like a bridge suddenly made visible. She died in college. Not from her disability, from a drug overdose. She'd been struggling with depression, feeling like she'd never find her place in the world, like she'd always be seen as less than whole. His voice caught slightly. "I've often wondered if things might have been different if the world had been more welcoming, if she'd had more examples of people like her living full, successful lives." Tanisha felt the weight of shared understanding settle between them. "I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating. It changed everything about how I see the world. Every barrier, every assumption, every moment when someone is made to feel less valuable because of how their body works, I see my sister facing those same obstacles." The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room's carefully curated comfort. Outside, the estate's gardens showed their autumn colors, and Tanisha realized they'd been talking for hours. The conversation had evolved from professional interest to personal revelation, creating an intimacy she hadn't expected when she'd left Madison's wedding. "Can I ask you something?" JJ said, his voice carrying a hesitation that seemed uncharacteristic. "Of course." "That wedding, your friend Madison. How long had you been planning it with her?" Tanisha considered how much truth to share. 8 months. We used to be very close in college. Best friends, actually. And now? Now I think success changed her into someone who sees my friendship as charity rather than choice." The words tasted bitter but honest. "It's been happening gradually, the cancelled plans, the delayed responses to calls, the way she includes me just enough to avoid feeling guilty about excluding me. That must be painful." "It is. But today taught me something important about the difference between being included and being welcomed." She met his gaze directly. "You welcomed me into conversation about my work, you asked for my opinions, you saw my research as valuable rather than just impressive for someone like me. Madison included me in her wedding by giving me a table behind the flowers and hoping I'd be grateful for the gesture." JJ was quiet for a moment, processing the distinction. "I'm sorry she wasn't the friend you deserved." "I'm not. Not anymore. Sometimes losing people who don't value you makes space for people who do." The implication hung between them, loaded with possibility and uncertainty. They were talking about more than friendship now, venturing into territory that felt both thrilling and dangerous. "Tanisha," JJ said quietly, I hope you know that asking you to dance wasn't about making a point or proving something to the other guests. I asked because I wanted to dance with you. Why? Because in 30 minutes of conversation, you'd shown me more insight and intelligence than I typically encounter in 30 hours of business meetings. Because you spoke about your work with passion that made me remember why I started my company in the first place. Because when you smiled while talking about universal design, you lit up like someone who'd found her calling. The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. JJ. Because, he continued, I realized I was sitting with someone extraordinary, and it would have been criminal to let the evening end without at least trying to show you how I see you. When was the last time someone saw your full worth instead of focusing on your limitations? How do you know when someone values you for who you are rather than who they think you should be? Share your thoughts below. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility and the awareness that they were approaching a line that, once crossed, would change everything. Tanisha felt the pull of attraction, not just physical, though JJ was undeniably handsome, but intellectual and emotional connection that she'd been starving for without realizing it. But reality intruded like cold water. I should probably mention, she said carefully, that I'm not exactly in your social league. I'm a graduate student who works part-time tutoring undergraduates and lives in a studio apartment with student loan debt that could fund a small country. And I should probably mention, JJ replied with a slight smile, that I don't particularly care about social leagues. I care about intelligence, integrity, and whether someone can challenge me to think differently about the world. But other people will care. The people in your circle, your business associates, the media if they ever notice, they'll have opinions about a billionaire dating a disabled graduate student. Let them have opinions. I've spent too many years making decisions based on what other people might think rather than what I actually want. The weight of his words settled between them, but Tanisha found herself thinking about the practical realities that passion couldn't simply overcome. What about your company? Your investors? Your public image? What about them? Don't you think they might object to you being associated with someone like me? JJ's expression hardened slightly. Someone like you? You mean someone brilliant? Someone working to make the world more inclusive? Someone who sees solutions where others see problems? Someone in a wheelchair, JJ. Someone who'll always need accommodations, who'll always stand out in crowds, who'll always require extra consideration for basic activities that most people take for granted. The words spilled out with more bitterness than she'd intended, but they carried the weight of 3 years of learning how the world really worked for people like her. The reality that even well-meaning people eventually grew tired of the extra effort required to include her fully in their lives. Is that what you think this is about? JJ asked quietly. Charity. Pity. Some kind of noble gesture to make myself feel better. I don't know what this is about. That's the problem. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. Outside, the afternoon was fading into evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that reminded her of the roses at Madison's wedding. 3 years ago, JJ said finally, I was engaged to a woman named Victoria. Beautiful, sophisticated, from exactly the right family with exactly the right connections. Perfect on paper. Tanisha waited, sensing this story was important. She broke up with me 2 weeks after my sister's funeral. Said I'd become too focused on depressing causes and that she couldn't be with someone who was always thinking about disabilities and social justice. She wanted the JJ who threw parties and bought expensive art, not the one who funded accessibility research and talked about universal design. I'm sorry. I'm not. Because she taught me that caring about the right things matters more than appearing to be the right person. She taught me that I'd rather be alone than with someone who couldn't understand why my sister's struggles mattered to me. What are you saying? I'm saying that if my investors have problems with me caring about accessibility, they're welcome to invest elsewhere. If the media wants to criticize me for dating someone who's making the world better, That says more about them than about us. And if my social circle can't accept someone as remarkable as you, then I need a better social circle." The certainty in his voice was both thrilling and terrifying. Tanisha had spent 3 years learning to expect less from the world, to be grateful for whatever inclusion she could find. The idea that someone might actively choose her, might prioritize her worth over social convenience, felt almost too good to believe. "But you barely know me," she protested. "This could just be chemistry, or novelty, or—" "It could be," he agreed. "Or it could be the beginning of something real. The only way to find out is to try." The proposition hung between them like a challenge. Tanisha thought about Madison's wedding, about sitting at table 12 while life happened around her rather than to her. She thought about 3 years of making herself smaller to fit into other people's comfort zones, of accepting limitations that were often failures of imagination rather than immutable realities. Then she thought about dancing in JJ's arms, about feeling beautiful and valued and seen in her entirety rather than despite her circumstances. "What would trying look like?" she asked. "Dinner tomorrow night. Conversation about something other than accessibility algorithms, though I reserve the right to circle back to those because they're fascinating. Getting to know each other beyond this afternoon's revelations. And if it doesn't work, if we discover we're too different, or the chemistry was just a moment, or the practical obstacles are too significant, then we'll handle it like adults. No harm, no foul, no regrets about having tried." Tanisha looked around the room that had been designed to welcome people like her, at the man who'd ask her to dance when everyone else had looked through her, at the possibility of a life where she was chosen rather than tolerated. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay. Okay, let's try." JJ's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face from handsome to breathtaking. "Really? Really? But I have conditions." "Name them." "I won't be your charity case or your social experiment. If you're going to date me, it's because you want to date me, not because you want to prove a point about inclusion." "Agreed. What else?" "I won't pretend to be anything other than who I am. I'm brilliant, I'm driven, I'm occasionally stubborn, and I happen to use a wheelchair. If any of those things become problems for you, tell me immediately rather than trying to manage around them." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes." Tanisha took a breath, gathering courage for the most important condition. "If this doesn't work out, you don't get to use it as evidence that dating disabled people is too complicated. We're individuals, not representatives of a demographic." JJ's expression grew serious. "I wouldn't dream of it. Is that something people have done?" "More often than you'd think. Failed relationships become cautionary tales about the challenges of dating people with disabilities, rather than just relationships that didn't work out for normal human reasons." "That's horrible." "It's reality. But if you're willing to see me as just Tanisha who happens to use a wheelchair, rather than a wheelchair user who happens to be named Tanisha, then we might have something worth exploring." JJ reached across the space between them, taking her hand in both of his. "Tanisha Briggs, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Not because you're extraordinary despite your disability, not because I want to prove how enlightened I am, but because you're the most interesting person I've met in years and I'd like to know more about what makes you laugh, what makes you angry, and whether you're as remarkable as I suspect you are." "I'd like that very much," she said, and meant it completely. As Marcus prepared for their return journey, Tanisha realized the afternoon had shifted something fundamental in her understanding of what was possible. For 3 years, she'd been accepting a world that saw her as less than whole. But JJ had offered her a glimpse of something different, a relationship based on recognition rather than accommodation, choice rather than charity. The question was whether they could navigate the challenges that would inevitably arise when two people from vastly different worlds tried to build something real together. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. When worlds collide. The photograph appeared on the front page of the Washington Business Journal 3 days after their first official date. Tanisha stared at the image over her morning coffee, her stomach dropping as she recognized herself and JJ outside the restaurant where they'd shared an evening of conversation that had lasted until the establishment tactfully suggested they might want to continue their discussion elsewhere. The headline read, "Billionaire's Surprising New Romance. Johnson Enterprises CEO Steps Out with Disabled Graduate Student." Her hands trembled slightly as she read the article, which managed to be both invasive and reductive, describing her alternately as wheelchair-bound and inspiring while speculating about JJ's motivations for the relationship. The piece included details about her accident, her academic work, and even her financial situation that could only have come from someone who'd done considerable research, or someone who knew her personally. The worst part wasn't the media attention itself, but the way the article framed their relationship as inherently newsworthy because of the supposed mismatch between a successful businessman and a disabled woman. As if love across different circumstances was so impossible it merited front-page coverage. Her phone had been ringing since 6 a.m. Unknown numbers, probably reporters seeking comment. She turned it to silent after the 15th call, but the red notification light continued blinking like a warning beacon. A knock at her apartment door made her freeze. Through the peephole, she could see a woman with a press badge and a man holding a camera. "Ms. Briggs, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd love to get your perspective on your relationship with Jason Johnson." Tanisha stepped back from the door, her heart racing. This was what JJ had warned her about, the inevitable media scrutiny that came with dating someone of his prominence. But knowing it was possible and experiencing the reality of strangers camping outside her home were entirely different things. Her phone buzzed with a text from JJ, "Saw the article. Are you okay? I'm coming over." She typed back quickly, "Reporters outside my building. Maybe not the best time. Back entrance. Through the parking garage. I'll meet you there." 20 minutes later, she found JJ waiting beside the service elevator in her building's underground garage, his expression grim. He'd clearly seen the morning's coverage, and the weight of what this meant for both of them was written across his features. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, moving to embrace her. "I knew this was a possibility, but I didn't think it would happen so quickly or be so intrusive." "It's not your fault," she replied, though part of her wondered if that was entirely true. "But we need to talk about what this means." They rode the elevator to her fourth-floor apartment in silence, both processing the reality that their private relationship had become public property overnight. Once inside her modest studio, which felt even smaller with JJ's presence filling the space, they sat on her small couch and faced the consequences of their choice to explore whatever was growing between them. "The article mentions details about my accident that I never shared publicly," Tanisha said, showing him the printed version she'd retrieved from her hallway. "Someone talked to the reporter. Someone who knew me before." JJ's jaw tightened as he read. "Any idea who?" "The only person who has access to that information and might have reason to share it is Madison. She knew about my accident, my financial situation, my academic work, everything mentioned here." "Your best friend sold you out to a reporter." "Ex-best friend, apparently." The betrayal stung more than the media attention itself. Madison hadn't just excluded her from the wedding's inner circle. She'd actively contributed to her public humiliation. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. She's always been image-conscious." JJ set the paper aside and took her hands in his. "What do you want to do?" "What do you mean?" "About us. About this relationship. The media attention is only going to get worse, and it's going to affect both our lives in ways we can't predict." Tanisha studied his face, searching for clues about what answer he was hoping for. "What do you want to do?" "I want to be with you. The media circus is inconvenient and invasive, but it doesn't change how I feel or what I want. But I need to know you're prepared for what this means. The scrutiny, the speculation, the way every aspect of your life becomes public property. It's not fair, but it's reality. Before she could answer, her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number she recognized. Dr. Patricia Williams from Georgetown. I should take this, she told JJ, answering the call. Tanisha, dear, I've been trying to reach you all morning. Dr. Williams' voice carried concern and urgency. I assume you've seen the news coverage. Yes, I want you to know that several reporters have contacted the university asking about your academic record, your research, even your attendance in classes. The administration is taking steps to protect your privacy, but I thought you should be aware. The implications hit Tanisha like a physical blow. Her academic life, the one space where she'd built credibility based purely on merit, was now being scrutinized because of her personal relationship. Thank you for the warning, she managed. There's something else. The Johnson Foundation Board is meeting this afternoon to discuss the media coverage and its potential impact on our accessibility initiatives. Some members are concerned that the relationship might overshadow the serious work we're funding. Tanisha's heart sank. Are they considering ending the partnership? I don't know yet. But I wanted you to be prepared for the possibility that this situation might affect funding for research you care about. After ending the call, Tanisha sat in stunned silence. In less than 12 hours, her private life had become entertainment, her academic reputation was under scrutiny, and research funding that supported work she believed in was potentially at risk. What's wrong? JJ asked gently. She explained Dr. Williams' call, watching his expression darken as she detailed the potential consequences for the accessibility research program. This is my fault, he said quietly. My visibility, my wealth, it creates complications for everyone around me. It's not your fault that people are more interested in gossip than substance. But it is my fault that I didn't adequately prepare you for what dating me would mean. I was selfish. I wanted to be with you so badly that I minimized the potential consequences. The honesty in his admission was both touching and terrifying. Tanisha could see the guilt eating at him, the way he was already beginning to withdraw emotionally as he processed the collateral damage their relationship had created. A sharp knock at her door interrupted their conversation. Through the peephole, she could see more reporters had arrived, a small crowd now gathered in her hallway. Ms. Briggs, would just like to ask a few questions about your relationship with Mr. Johnson. Is it true you met at a wedding where you were ignored by other guests? What's it like dating one of America's richest men? The questions continued, each one more invasive than the last. Tanisha stepped back from the door, feeling trapped in her own home. This is insane, she said to JJ. I can't even leave my apartment without running a gauntlet of people who want to turn my life into a news story. JJ was already reaching for his phone. Marcus can arrange security, get you out of here safely. You can stay at my estate until this dies down. And then what? I hide behind your gates every time someone decides our relationship is newsworthy? I become dependent on your resources to live my own life. It's temporary. Once the novelty wears off. Will it wear off, JJ? Or will this be our reality as long as we're together? Will I always be the disabled woman who captured the billionaire's heart, rather than just Tanisha who happens to be dating someone successful? The questions hung between them like accusations, even though Tanisha hadn't meant them that way. But the implications were clear. Their relationship came with a cost that affected her independence, her career, and her ability to control her own narrative. Have you ever had to choose between love and your sense of self? When does protecting someone you care about become controlling their choices? What would you sacrifice for a relationship, and what would be too much? Share your thoughts below. JJ stood and moved to her window, peering through the blinds at the reporters gathering on the sidewalk below. Maybe this was a mistake, he said quietly. What was a mistake? Us. This relationship. I knew my life came with complications, but I convinced myself that what we had was worth it. I didn't consider whether it would be worth it for you. Don't I get to make that decision? Do you? Or are you just trying to convince yourself that love can overcome every practical obstacle? The question stung because it echoed her own doubts. Was she being naive to think they could build something real despite the vast differences in their circumstances? Was she setting herself up for a different kind of disappointment, not rejection, but a relationship that required her to sacrifice too much of herself? I don't know, she admitted. This morning I thought the biggest challenge would be navigating different social circles or managing the practical aspects of dating someone with your schedule. I didn't anticipate my entire life becoming public property. This is what I was afraid of. That my world would diminish yours rather than enhance it. Your world isn't diminishing me, JJ. The media's interpretation of your world is the problem. Is there a difference? The media tension comes with the territory. If we stay together, this kind of scrutiny will be part of your life permanently. Tanisha wheeled closer to where he stood by the window, studying his profile as he watched the circus unfolding below. She could see the internal struggle playing out across his features, love warring with protection, desire competing with guilt. Are you trying to break up with me? She asked directly. I'm trying to give you an out before this gets worse. What if I don't want an out? Then I think you're not fully understanding what staying means. The patronizing tone in his voice sparked anger that overrode her uncertainty. Don't you dare tell me what I do or don't understand. I'm 24 years old, I have 2 degrees, and I've been making my own decisions since I was 18. I don't need you to protect me from my own choices. This isn't about your intelligence or your capability. Isn't it? Because it sounds like you've decided what's best for me without bothering to ask what I actually want. What I want is for you to have the life you deserve without the complications that come with being associated with me. And what I want is for you to stop trying to make decisions for me based on what you think I can or can't handle. They stared at each other across the small space of her apartment, the tension crackling between them like electricity. This was their first real fight, and it was about something that cut to the core of who they were as individuals and what they wanted as a couple. JJ's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression tightened. It's my board chair. I need to take this. Jason, came the voice through the speaker before JJ could stop him from using hands-free mode. We need to talk immediately. The media coverage of your personal life is creating concerns among investors about your judgment and the company's direction. JJ quickly switched to private mode and stepped into Tanisha's small kitchen area, but she'd heard enough to understand the implications. His relationship with her wasn't just affecting her life, it was creating professional consequences for him as well. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, JJ's responses growing increasingly terse as the discussion progressed. When he finally ended the call, his face was pale. Emergency board meeting in 2 hours, he said. There are concerns that the media coverage is affecting stock prices and investor confidence. Because you're dating me. Because they think I'm making personal decisions that reflect poorly on my professional judgment. Same thing. JJ sat heavily on her couch, running his hands through his hair. Tanisha, I need you to know that whatever the board says, whatever pressure they apply, it won't change how I feel about you. But I also need to be realistic about what fighting this fight will cost, and whether it's fair to ask you to pay that price with me. What if I want to pay it? What if you only think you do because you're caught up in the romance of it all? What if 6 months from now, when every grocery store trip requires security and every academic achievement gets overshadowed by speculation about our relationship, you realize the cost was too high? What if 6 months from now, you realize that choosing board approval over personal happiness was the real mistake? The questions circled around each other like opposing forces, neither able to definitively answer what the right choice might be. They were venturing into territory that required faith rather than logic, hope rather than certainty. I have to go to this meeting, JJ said finally. But we need to finish this conversation. Do we? Or do we need to accept that some problems don't have solutions, just choices about which consequences we're willing to live with? He stood and moved toward her, kneeling beside her wheelchair so they were at eye level. I love you, Tanisha. I know it's early to say that, and I know the timing is terrible given everything else that's happening, but I need you to know. Whatever else is uncertain, that's not. The declaration hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and making her heart race. JJ. I love your intelligence, your passion for your work, the way you see solutions where others see problems. I love how you challenge me to think differently about accessibility and inclusion. I love that you call me on my assumptions and refuse to be impressed by things that don't matter. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. But love doesn't solve the practical problems we're facing. No, it doesn't. But maybe it makes them worth solving. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of uncertainty about what came next. When they broke apart, both of them were crying, for the simplicity they'd lost, for the complications they'd gained, for the possibility that love might not be enough to overcome the obstacles arrayed against them. Go to your meeting, Tanisha said. Figure out what you're willing to fight for and what you're willing to sacrifice. But JJ, don't make decisions about my life without including me in the process. Whatever we face together, or we don't face it at all. Together, he agreed. Whatever comes next, we decide together. After he left through the parking garage to avoid the reporters, Tanisha sat alone in her apartment, processing the morning's revelations. Through her window, she could see the media circus continuing, photographers positioning themselves for the best shots, reporters rehearsing their stand-ups. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news. You always did aim high. Hope you're ready for the fall. M. Madison. Even in crisis, unable to resist twisting the knife. But for the first time since seeing the morning's newspaper, Tanisha felt something other than anxiety about the situation. She felt angry, not at JJ, not at the media, but at the assumption that she was somehow unworthy of love from someone successful. Angry at the implication that their relationship was inherently newsworthy because it crossed some invisible line of social acceptability. She thought about the dance in Madison's garden, about feeling beautiful and valued and seen in her entirety. She thought about conversations with JJ that challenged her intellectually and emotionally. She thought about the possibility of building something real with someone who chose her not despite her circumstances but because of who she was as a complete person. The choice crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. She wasn't going to let other people's small-mindedness dictate the boundaries of her life. She wasn't going to accept the premise that love across different circumstances was somehow inappropriate or unsustainable. If JJ was willing to fight for them, then so was she. The question was whether he would emerge from his board meeting with the same resolve, or whether the pressure would convince him that protecting her meant pushing her away. In 2 hours, she would have her answer. Love without limits. The Johnson Enterprises boardroom fell silent as JJ finished reading his prepared statement. 15 of the most powerful business leaders in the country sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from shocked to disapproving to grudgingly impressed. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, said Margaret Thornton, the board's longest-serving member. You're telling us that if we have problems with your personal relationships, we're welcome to find other investment opportunities. I'm telling you that Johnson Enterprises has always been built on principles of innovation, inclusion, and social responsibility, JJ replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was risking. If my relationship with Dr. Briggs somehow contradicts those values, then perhaps we need to examine what we actually stand for as an organization. Dr. Briggs? Asked another board member. Tanisha is completing her doctorate in applied mathematics with a focus on accessibility algorithms. She's not just a disabled graduate student, as the media insists on labeling her. She's a brilliant researcher whose work could revolutionize how we design inclusive spaces. Richard Blackstone, the board's most conservative member, leaned forward with barely concealed irritation. Jason, we're not questioning the young woman's credentials. We're questioning your judgment in pursuing a relationship that creates unnecessary complications for the company. Unnecessary according to whom? According to our stock price, which dropped 3% yesterday. According to our investors, who are questioning whether your personal life indicates a lack of focus on business priorities. According to our public relations team, who can't figure out how to spin this situation positively. JJ had anticipated these arguments, had spent the past 2 hours preparing for exactly this conversation. But hearing the cold calculation behind their concerns, the reduction of his love for Tanisha to stock points and PR problems, crystallized something important about what kind of leader he wanted to be. Richard, he said quietly, 3 years ago, my sister died because she couldn't find her place in a world that consistently told her she was less valuable than other people. I started the Johnson Foundation's accessibility initiatives to honor her memory and to prevent other families from experiencing that loss. We all appreciate your philanthropic work. This isn't philanthropy. This is personal growth. Tanisha has taught me more about genuine inclusion in 3 weeks than I learned in 3 years of funding research. She's made me a better person and a better leader. If that's not something this board can support, then maybe I'm not the right CEO for this company. The silence that followed was deafening. JJ was essentially threatening to resign rather than compromise his relationship with Tanisha, a move that would send shockwaves through the business community and potentially destabilize one of America's most successful corporations. Margaret Thornton was the first to speak. Jason, are you giving us an ultimatum? I'm giving you clarity about my priorities. Johnson Enterprises will continue to lead in innovation and social responsibility, with or without board members who can't embrace what that actually means. And if the media attention continues, if your personal life keeps overshadowing company business, then we'll handle it the same way we handle any other business challenge, with creativity, intelligence, and commitment to our values. The debate continued for another hour, but JJ could see the momentum shifting. Several board members who'd initially expressed concerns began asking different questions about Tanisha's research, about potential applications for Johnson Enterprises projects, about whether the company might actually benefit from being associated with cutting-edge accessibility work. By the meeting's end, JJ had not only retained his position but gained approval for a new initiative partnering with universities to fund accessibility research. The board had chosen to embrace the opportunity rather than resist the change. But as he left the corporate headquarters, JJ knew the real test wasn't convincing his board, it was proving to Tanisha that his love for her wouldn't come at the cost of her independence. Tanisha was in her apartment's small kitchen, stress-baking cookies she didn't particularly want to eat, when she heard the crowd outside her building begin to disperse. Through her window, she watched reporters packing up equipment and photographers dismantling their setups. Her phone rang, JJ's number. "The vultures are leaving," she said by way of greeting. "I may have had something to do with that," he replied. "Can I come up? I have news." Good news or bad news? That depends on how you feel about being offered a consulting position with Johnson Enterprises. 20 minutes later, JJ sat on her couch with a cup of coffee, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him since the media storm began. The tension that had been radiating from him during their earlier conversation had been replaced by something that looked like quiet confidence. "Tell me about the board meeting," she said. "I told them that if they had problems with our relationship, they were welcome to find other investment opportunities." "You did what?" "I told them that loving you has made me a better leader, and if they couldn't see the value in that, maybe I wasn't the right CEO for them." Tanisha stared at him, processing the implications of what he'd risked for their relationship. "JJ, you could have lost everything." "I could have. But I didn't. In fact, the board approved funding for a new accessibility research initiative, and they want you to head the consulting team." "They want me to what?" "Lead a team of researchers developing accessibility applications for Johnson Enterprises projects. It would be a significant position, Your own budget, your own staff, real influence over how we design inclusive spaces. The offer was everything she'd dreamed of professionally, but something about the timing made her hesitate. Is this a real job offer based on my qualifications, or is this the board's way of managing the optics around our relationship? It's a real job offer that exists because our relationship made me realize how much expertise we've been missing. But Tanisha, if you're not interested, or if you think it creates uncomfortable dynamics between us, we can find other ways to implement these initiatives. She appreciated that he was giving her a genuine choice rather than presenting the offer as a solution to their problems. What about the media attention? The speculation about whether I earned this position or whether it's just nepotism. There will always be people who question your achievements, whether you're dating me or not. The question is whether you're going to let their skepticism determine what opportunities you pursue. It was a fair point. For 3 years, she'd been navigating a world that consistently underestimated her capabilities. At least this opportunity would allow her to prove her worth on a larger stage while advancing work she cared about. I'd want to see the job description, understand the reporting structure, meet the team I'd be working with, she said. Of course. This would be a professional relationship with professional standards, regardless of our personal connection. And what about us? What happens to our relationship if I'm working for your company? JJ was quiet for a moment, considering the complexity of mixing professional and personal relationships. We'd need clear boundaries. At work, you'd report to the VP of Research and Development, not to me. Your performance evaluations would be conducted by people who can assess your work objectively. And if our personal relationship ever ended, your professional position would be protected. You've thought this through. I've had 2 hours to think about little else. Tanisha, I want to be with you, but not in a way that compromises your independence or your career. This job offer stands regardless of what happens between us personally. The distinction mattered enormously. Tanisha had been afraid that dating JJ would mean becoming dependent on his resources, losing her autonomy in exchange for access to his world. But he was offering her something different, professional opportunity based on merit, with protections for her independence. There's something else, JJ said. I had my legal team issue cease and desist orders to the reporters who've been harassing you. Covering public figures is one thing, but camping outside your home crosses the line into stalking. Is that why they left? That, and I may have mentioned to a few media contacts that anyone interested in covering our relationship might want to focus on Tanisha's groundbreaking research rather than treating her like a curiosity. She could see the careful balance he was trying to strike, using his influence to protect her without trying to control her choices. It was the kind of thoughtful consideration that made her remember why she'd fallen for him in the first place. What about Madison? She asked. The article quoted information that could only have come from her. I can't do anything about friends who betray your trust, but I can make sure there are consequences for anyone who profits from sharing your private information without permission. Meaning my legal team is very good at making people regret poor choices. Despite everything, Tanisha found herself smiling. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Playing the protective boyfriend. I'm enjoying being able to do something constructive instead of just worrying about you. But Tanisha, I need you to know, I'm not trying to rescue you. I'm trying to partner with you. What's the difference? Rescuing implies you need saving. Partnering means we're choosing to face challenges together because we're stronger as a team. The distinction resonated deeply with her. For 3 years, people had wanted to help her, to accommodate her, to make allowances for her circumstances. But few had seen her as someone capable of mutual support, someone who could contribute as much as she received. When has someone seen you as a partner rather than a project? How do you know when love is about equality rather than charity? What does it mean to build something together instead of one person saving the other? Share your thoughts below. I have a condition, she said finally. What's that? If I take this job, I want to be judged by the same standards as any other consultant. No special treatment, no lowered expectations, no one walking on eggshells because I'm dating the boss. Deal. What else? If our relationship doesn't work out, I want your word that it won't affect my professional relationships with the company. You have it. Anything else? Yes. She moved her wheelchair closer to where he sat on the couch, taking his hands in hers. I want you to promise that you'll never again try to make decisions about what I can or can't handle without consulting me first. I promise. Though I reserve the right to worry about you and to want to protect you from unnecessary harm. As long as you remember that unnecessary is my determination to make, not yours. Understood. They sat quietly for a moment, both processing how dramatically their lives had changed in the span of a single day. The morning had begun with crisis and the possibility that external pressures might tear them apart. Now they were planning a future that included both personal partnership and professional collaboration. Are you scared? Tanisha asked. Terrified. JJ admitted. We're venturing into territory I've never navigated before, a relationship with someone who challenges me intellectually, professionally, and personally. Someone who won't let me hide behind wealth or status when I'm being an idiot. Good. You should be scared. I'm not going to be the kind of girlfriend who makes your life easier by being grateful for whatever attention you can spare. What kind of girlfriend are you going to be? The kind who expects you to grow as much as I do. The kind who'll call you on your assumptions and push you to be better than you think you can be. The kind who'll love you for who you are while refusing to let you settle for who you've been. That sounds exhausting. It sounds like partnership. JJ leaned forward and kissed her, slow and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. So, he said, ready to scandalize society by being brilliantly successful while dating someone who's not ashamed to be seen with you. I thought I was the one dating up in this relationship. We're both dating up. That's what makes it interesting. 6 months later, Tanisha stood in the Johnson Foundation's new Accessibility Research Center, watching her team of engineers and designers test the latest iteration of universal design software she developed. The algorithm could analyze any architectural plan and suggest modifications that would improve accessibility without compromising aesthetic or functional goals. The work was everything she dreamed of, challenging, impactful, and respected by colleagues who valued her expertise rather than viewing her as an inspirational curiosity. Her research was being implemented in real projects across the country, from office buildings to public parks to transportation systems. Dr. Briggs. Her assistant knocked on the office door. The Washington Post reporter is here for your interview. The media attention hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had evolved. Instead of focusing on her wheelchair or her relationship with JJ, journalists now wanted to discuss her work, her research, her vision for creating more inclusive environments. She'd become known for her innovations rather than her circumstances. Send her in, Tanisha said. The interview went well, focusing on the practical applications of her accessibility algorithms and the potential for scaling the technology globally. As the reporter packed up her equipment, she asked the question Tanisha had been expecting. One last thing, how has your relationship with Jason Johnson influenced your work? My relationship with JJ has given me access to resources and platforms I might not have had otherwise, Tanisha replied honestly. But the work itself, the ideas, the innovations, those come from years of research and lived experience. He provided the opportunity. I provided the expertise. And personally, are you happy? Tanisha considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been sitting alone at table 12, watching life happen around her while feeling systematically excluded from meaningful participation. Now she was leading groundbreaking research, building professional relationships based on mutual respect, and planning a future with someone who saw her as an equal partner. I'm building the life I want with someone who encourages me to dream bigger than I thought possible, she said. So yes, I'm happy. After the reporter left, Tanisha returned to her office to find JJ waiting with takeout from their favorite restaurant and a bottle of champagne. "What's the occasion?" she asked. "The city approved our proposal for the accessible playground design. Your algorithm made it possible to create play equipment that works for kids with different physical abilities while still being challenging and fun for everyone." "That's amazing." She accepted the glass of champagne he offered, clinking it against his in celebration. To universal design. To seeing possibilities instead of limitations. They settled at the small table in her office, sharing dinner while discussing the day's developments. It had become their routine, finding moments of connection despite busy schedules, supporting each other's work while maintaining their individual identities. "I got a call from Madison today," Tanisha said as they finished eating. JJ's expression tightened slightly. What did she want? To apologize, apparently. She saw the Washington Post article about my work and wanted to congratulate me. How do you feel about that? Disappointed, mostly. She had 8 months to support my work while we were planning her wedding. She chose to wait until it became publicly recognized before acknowledging its value. Are you going to respond? I already did. I thanked her for the call and told her I was glad she was doing well, but I didn't invite further conversation. That seems appropriate. Some friendships are meant to be lessons rather than lifelong connections, Tanisha reflected. Madison taught me to value people who choose me consistently, not just when it's convenient or socially advantageous. Speaking of people who choose you consistently, JJ said, reaching into his jacket pocket, I have something for you. It's not my birthday. It's not a birthday gift. He pulled out a small velvet box, setting it on the table between them with hands that trembled slightly. Tanisha's breath caught as she realized what this moment represented. Tanisha Briggs, he said quietly, 6 months ago, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life. It's about building a new life together that's better than anything either person could create alone. JJ. You've made me braver, more thoughtful, more committed to using whatever influence I have to create positive change. You've shown me that true partnership means supporting each other's dreams while pursuing shared goals. He opened the box to reveal a ring that was both elegant and unique, a design that somehow perfectly captured both sophistication and individuality. I'm not asking you to marry my wealth or my status or my social position. I'm asking you to marry me, the person you've helped me become, the man who's learned to see possibilities instead of limitations. Tanisha stared at the ring, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. Marriage to JJ would mean permanent entry into his world of privilege and scrutiny, but it would also mean a lifetime partnership with someone who saw her worth clearly and chose her consistently. Are you prepared for a wife who'll never stop challenging you to grow? She asked. I'm counting on it. A wife who'll expect you to be a true partner in building something meaningful, not just a provider of resources. I wouldn't want anything less. A wife who happens to use a wheelchair and will always need accommodations that might be inconvenient or complicated. A wife who's taught me that accommodation is just another word for thoughtfulness, and thoughtfulness is the foundation of love. Tanisha reached across the table, taking the ring from its box and sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Like everything else about their relationship, it required intention and effort to get right, but the result was worth the investment. Yes, she said simply. Yes to marriage, yes to partnership, yes to building something beautiful together. JJ moved around the table to kiss her, and Tanisha marveled at how much had changed since that afternoon in Madison's garden when she'd felt invisible and forgotten. She'd learned that being seen clearly was more valuable than being seen frequently, that being chosen deliberately was more meaningful than being included reluctantly. The dance that had started in a garden of white roses had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that love's greatest gift isn't completion but expansion. Together, they'd learned to see possibilities where others saw problems, to build bridges where others built walls. As they held each other in her office overlooking the research center where her dreams were becoming reality, Tanisha realized that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with a princess in a tower, but with a brilliant woman at table 12 who refuses to accept other people's limitations as her own. The job nobody wanted had led to the love she'd never dared to imagine. And their best days were still ahead. 2 years later, the Johnson Briggs Accessibility Research Center buzzed with activity as teams of researchers, designers, and engineers collaborated on projects that were transforming how the world thought about inclusive design. What had started as a small consulting contract had evolved into a leading institution for accessibility innovation. With Dr. Tanisha Johnson, she'd kept her professional name hyphenated, serving as its director. The center's latest breakthrough was an AI system that could analyze any public space and suggest real-time modifications to improve accessibility for people with various physical needs. The technology was being implemented in airports, shopping centers, and university campuses across the country, making navigation easier for millions of people. But perhaps the most meaningful project was the memorial garden they'd created on the center's grounds, a space dedicated to JJ's sister Sarah and all the people whose potential had been limited by a world that failed to imagine their possibilities. The garden featured paths designed for wheelchairs, seating at multiple heights, and sensory elements that made it accessible to people with visual or auditory differences. Tanisha often took her lunch breaks in the garden, finding peace among the flowers that bloomed in careful diversity. Today, she was joined by Dr. Patricia Williams, who'd become both a mentor and a dear friend. "Have you given any thought to the university's offer?" Dr. Williams asked, referring to Georgetown's invitation for Tanisha to establish an accessibility research department. "I'm considering it," Tanisha replied. "It would mean splitting my time between here and the university, but it could help train the next generation of researchers." "And how does JJ feel about you potentially taking on additional responsibilities?" "He's excited about it. He says watching me pursue my dreams is one of his favorite pastimes." "That's a good husband." "He's learned to be. We both have." They sat in comfortable silence, watching students from the nearby university navigate the garden's pathways. Some walked, some used wheelchairs, some carried white canes or moved with the confident steps of people who'd learned to trust their other senses. All of them belonged in this space that had been designed to welcome human diversity. "Do you ever regret taking the job nobody wanted?" Dr. Williams asked with a smile. Tanisha thought about the woman who'd sat alone at table 12, watching life happen around her while feeling systematically excluded from meaningful participation. She thought about the fear she'd felt when JJ first asked her to dance, the terror of hoping for something that seemed too good to be true. "Never," she said. "Some of life's best opportunities come disguised as impossible dreams." As if summoned by their conversation, JJ appeared on the garden's main path, returning from a meeting with city planners about implementing accessibility features in the downtown renovation project. He'd learned to move through the world differently in the past 2 years, more thoughtfully, more aware of how design choices affected people's ability to participate fully in community life. "How did the meeting go?" Tanisha asked as he joined them on the garden bench. "They approved the full accessibility package," he said, unable to suppress his excitement. "Your algorithms convinced them that inclusive design would actually save money in the long run while serving more people effectively." "That's wonderful news." "Dr. Williams," JJ turned to their companion, "Tanisha and I have been discussing the Georgetown opportunity. We'd love your thoughts on how to structure a program that would really make a difference." As they talked about practical applications and educational frameworks, Tanisha marveled at how seamlessly their professional and personal lives had merged into something greater than the sum of their parts. They'd learned to build a relationship that enhanced rather than diminished their individual capabilities, that created space for both people to grow while growing together. The memorial garden around them bloomed with the kind of intentional beauty that emerged when someone took the time to consider what thriving looked like for everyone, not just the majority. It was a living reminder that the most profound changes often began with someone brave enough to imagine a different kind of possibility. Tanisha Johnson had taken the job nobody wanted and discovered it was exactly the opportunity she needed. She'd learned that being seen clearly was more valuable than being seen sympathetically, that being chosen deliberately was more meaningful than being included reluctantly. And in a world that still struggled to recognize the full humanity of people like her, she'd found someone willing to dance with her exactly as she was, not despite her circumstances, but because of the complete, complex, brilliant person those circumstances had helped her become. The dance that began in a garden of white roses continued every day, in quiet moments and public victories, in professional achievements and personal growth, in the ongoing choice to build something beautiful together in a world that desperately needed more beauty. Their love story was proof that sometimes the greatest romances don't begin with a princess in a tower, but with a brilliant woman who refuses to accept other people's limitations as her own, and finds a partner brave enough to imagine new possibilities alongside her. The job nobody wanted had led to the love she'd never dared to dream. And their best days were still ahead, filled with the infinite potential that emerged when two people chose to see possibilities instead of problems, to build bridges instead of walls, to dance together in whatever form that dancing might take.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.